Hello, I'm Paul Bradshaw.
And I'm Lauren Gray. Welcome to Viral History, the only show on the internet that satisfies all of your history needs.
Coming up on this week's show, I sit down with historian, broadcaster and all-round national treasure, Michael Wood.
We get exclusive access to actual artefacts from the Great Train Robbery.
And I get practical advice on how to dress like a medieval pilgrim.
First up, the news.
Letters dating back to the 17th century have been discovered at a National Trust property in Kent. Volunteers uncovered the rare documents as part of a conservation project at Knowle. The last coins of a Celtic hoard have been successfully removed from the dirt that they were buried in. Known as Catilan II, the hoard was found in a field in Jersey and date to around 50 BCE. And the Museum of London received a massive cash boost as it looks to create a new home in West Smithfields. The museum has been awarded £180 million by the Mayor and the City of London Corporation. The museum's new site should open in 5 years' time.
Now, he may be an Anglo-Saxonist at heart, but Michael Wood has also made some of the best loved and most watched factual history programmes of the last 30 years.
Yes, from Alexander the Great and the Trojan War to Beowulf and Shakespeare, Michael has been a tireless and passionate advocate of public history on our screens and in our bookshops for decades.
Recently, Viral History had the great pleasure of an in-depth interview with him.
Michael Wood, thank you so much for joining us on Viral History. As a grammar school boy from Manchester, you had a very significant trip to the Houses of Parliament where you met two very significant figures from history.
Yeah, I was at school at the time. It was the 900th anniversary of the Norman Conquest, and I wrote something in the papers that caused a bit of a stir, and I was invited by great British war hero, Field Marshal Montgomery of Alamein, who commanded the British armies at D-Day and won Alamein, because I disputed his view of the Norman Conquest, me a school kid and him a great national figure. And it was great fun, and I met Attlee the year before he died, the old Labour Prime Minister, who was very, very sweet, actually. He was very, very kind, perhaps because I was a kid, he made more of an effort to talk to me, But it was all about the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons have been my great love for early English history all through my life. And when I had Field Marshal Montgomery saying in print and on telly that the Anglo-Saxons were just backward load of long-haired woodsmen and the Normans brought Norman civilization and discipline and culture, and I was furious. Attlee did say to me when I explained that I was there talking about this, he said, the Norman yoke, that old chestnut, you see. So he knew all about it because it was a big thing in the English radical tradition. The idea that the Norman conquest had represented a break, with a fundamental break in English history, and that there had been certain rights and dues and under the law pre the conquest that we'd lost under the tyranny of the Normans. And the radicals in the English Revolution, the Levellers and the Diggers and all those people, believed by overthrowing King Charles, they were essentially getting rid of the Norman yoke. So it was a very long-lasting myth in our history, and a myth that isn't entirely myth, you see. I think my argument would be that the English people, it was the biggest disaster ever suffered by the English people, and it took them a century or two to get over it, certainly a century to get over the active fallout of the Norman conquest, brutal repression, apartheid, everything you name that was. But it took a lot longer for the idea to fade away that it had been this catastrophe, And you can trace the myth all the way through, past the English Civil War. But in the Civil War, it was a big thing. You look at the Putney debates that the army had in front of Fairfax and Cromwell and everywhere in Putney Church, 1647. You look at the writings of Gerard Winstanley, the great digger leader, and they talk about the Norman conquest as being this fundamental break. And they believed that the Anglo-Saxons had a more just and equitable polity before 1066. And, to an extent that's myth. The Anglo-Saxon kings could be ferociously cruel, and sometimes in their laws they were, but it's not entirely a fantasy. The best of the Anglo-Saxon kings did attempt to create a humane and just society, even though to our eyes, a lot of their punishments were severe. But, you know, there's a moment in Athelstan's law code where he's being badgered by his counsellor, and he says, I'm sorry that law and order is in such a bad way as we see everywhere is the case, and my counsellors say I've borne it too long. And they lift the death penalty from, they fix the death penalty at 12. And then the king, shortly afterwards, sends a message to his counsellors saying, this is too cruel. There's too many young people being executed. I've seen it everywhere. We're bringing the death penalty to 15. And this is in the 930s. But 8, 9 and 10-year-old children were executed under the law in the beginning of the 1800s, in Dickens's childhood, in England, for the theft of sheep or a small amount of money. See? So they were, that's what I love about the period. The Anglo-Saxons were wrestling with fundamental problems of justice and law and order. How do we create a just Christian society, you know? And you know, golden ages are really fascinating, and it's great to go to Florence and see, you know, Michelangelo and Leonardo, or walk through Hampton Court Palace and all that stuff, you know. But there's something about the Dark Ages and the early Middle Ages where they're trying from the very bottom to build things up when the learning has been destroyed, and there's something really moving and heroic about that, I think, and that's why Alfred the Great's the greatest Briton, you know. But that's why I love the Anglo-Saxons.
Michael Wood, thank you.
Wow, what a fascinating man.
Yeah, great pleasure to meet him, actually. And do check out the full interview with Michael Wood that's linked in the description.
Great stuff. Well, up next on Viral History, our roving reporter Gemma Chandler gets up close and personal with artefacts from one of the most notorious crime scenes of the 20th century in our series Material Evidence.
Hi, I'm Gemma Chandler, and this week we're at the Galleries of Justice Museum in Nottingham to look at some fascinating objects in the storerooms here. So I'm with Bev, who's the senior curator, and she's going to talk us through these artefacts from the Great Train Robbery of 1963.
So this is probably one of the most famous heists in history. So the Great Train Robbery happened in 1963. They robbed a Royal Mail train which had £3.2 million on its second carriage, which is probably the equivalent of £30 million in today's currency. So it's not a small amount to be sniffed at. And there's a large team of them. There's about 15 robbers in total. And they heisted the carriage. There was obviously a victim, because obviously, although he didn't actually die at the scene, the driver was knocked over the head and he did die of his injuries later on. So they actually used the driver to take the carriage to a stop near Buckinghamshire, where they could actually unload the bags of money into their lorry, and then they went to hide in a local farm in Buckinghamshire, in Oakley, called Leatherslade Farm. And they lay low there. They obviously ate there, they slept there, and they also played Monopoly, which is quite an interesting pastime for them. But they all did get rounded up. They didn't escape, and they all got arrested one by one, and they were obviously found guilty and sentenced to various lengths of time in prison. And we are very fortunate to have a number of items relating to that particular crime. So we've got a combat jacket, which was worn by one of the robbers, which was bought in auction for us for the museum. And then we've got some Monopoly money, which they used whilst they were playing, but they also did use some of the money that they actually robbed off the mail train as well to actually play Monopoly. So they actually played with the real money as well as the actual Monopoly fake money as well. And we've also got the key from the Land Rover that they used to escape from the robbery as well. So these are just a small section of items relating to this particular case. We have got other ones within our collection as well.
Well, thanks Bev for talking us through the items. It's fascinating to see something that's from one of the greatest heists in history. So join us again next week when we'll be talking about some more amazing artefacts.
Now, this year I decided to take on a challenge I've been wanting to do for many years, to walk the famous medieval trail, Pilgrim's Way.
So Pilgrim's Way is a 70-mile route between London and Canterbury.
That's right, the trail medieval pilgrims travelled to honour the martyr Thomas Becket. And ahead of such a daunting prospect, I decided to get some expert historical advice.
So firstly we have the sclaven, which is a long coarse tunic, which is what you're wearing. Then we have the staff here, which at the bottom would have had a sort of two-pronged spike in it, or one-pronged spike, which had been reinforced with a metal, probably iron. And at the top would have had a sort of handle with two nodules, or it would have had a cross that you could hang something from, perhaps your pouch or your water bottle. And then you would also have your scrip, which was a little leather pouch. This is a bit different to the original, the medieval one, which would have tied at the top as well. But we've got a different design, but it's the best we could do.
And this would have been blessed before pilgrims would have left their place of where they were from?
Right before you'd go on your pilgrimage, you would make an appointment with your priest, that's the easiest way to put it, and you would sort of get rid of all your issues, as it were. You would get rid of your debts, you would get rid put to bed any arguments you might have, and you would make a will. And then you would go to your priest and you would make your pilgrimage vow, and in turn he would give you the pilgrimage blessing. And you would get your staff. You'd be presented a little bit like the knight is presented with the sword, a little bit akin to that. And the staff and the scrip would be put on the high altar, and the blessing would be instilled within them so that they are protected on their pilgrim journey, as it were. And then once you have sort of been invested with that blessing, you can then put on your pilgrim uniform.
And the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, I guess, is this.
So a cloak would have pinned around here, but in the medieval you have also had something which was a scarf that's perhaps tied around you. So this is sort of the best we could do in the modern era. A scarf that's tied around you. And what's important about having the sort of the sclavin and the scarf or the cloak is that these doubled up as your sleeping bags.
So I feel very much prepared for pilgrimage now. Shall we put our hats on, our wide brim hats, and lead on? Let's go.
No, that was not a good look.
No, but in the 13th century, I'd have been totally on point.
That hat did not look 13th century. Anyway, here's Marguerite with this week's On This Day.
26th of January, Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, became the Prime Minister today in 1828, but he chose not to live at number 10 Downing Street because it was too small.
'Marguerite, a head full of facts and dates.
Yeah, she's awesome. I wonder if her passion for history runs in the family. Anyway, that's about it from us for this week.
But don't forget to follow Viral History on Facebook and Twitter, like this video and subscribe to our channel.
And remember, what's past is prologue.
See you next week.